In wartime, the first thing you lose is not your money. It's predictability. One week you are complaining about prices. The next week you are learning that even bread, weather, and light can turn into security issues. This episode is a tour of strict wartime rules people don't expect, the weird, petty, and terrifying ways national security can reach your kitchen. And for the record, these were not just vibes. They were enforced in real life. No legal jargon. Just what the rule was, what it felt like, and what it did to ordinary people. Ready? Let's go. 1. In wartime Britain, morale was treated like infrastructure, and speech was policed to protect it. A bleak joke in a grocery line could draw attention fast, because defeatist talk was seen as contagious. Police and local officials could warn you, question you, or escalate it if they believed your words undermined public confidence. Most people assume a joke stays a joke. The unsettling shift is when a mood starts counting as misconduct. 2. During the First World War in the United Kingdom, kite flying got pulled into security fears under emergency restrictions in certain areas. A kite in the wrong place could look like signaling instead of play. Officials could stop it on the spot if it seemed risky near sensitive sites. We think of a kite as harmless by default. A kite on a string was enough to get stopped. 3. In wartime America, pre-sliced bread was briefly restricted, according to period reporting, as a conservation measure. Bakeries and stores shifted to unsliced loaves, and households did the work at home again. Retailers complied while the restriction lasted, even when customers complained. Convenience always feels permanent until it isn't. Sliced bread didn't fade out, it got switched off. 4. With rationing in effect, bread stopped being casual, and feeding pigeons in London could be treated like waste. Wardens and local authorities warned people and issued fines in some areas when they chose to enforce it. In a public square, a handful of crumbs could suddenly look like defiance. You might mean kindness, but scarcity changes how actions get read. The birds ate well. The person holding the crumbs paid for it. 5. Blackout rules in Britain turned light into evidence. Wardens patrolled streets, watching for any glow leaking from curtains or doors. Households were fined for visible light during enforced blackout hours, even when it was just a small mistake. Most of us expect home to feel private at night. One thin strip of light could buy a fine. 6. The United States set a nationwide speed limit during the Second World War, largely to conserve gasoline and rubber. The rule was supply math, not a comment on your driving skill. Police wrote tickets for speeding even on empty roads, because tires and fuel were treated like shared resources. You might feel safe going faster. Speed turned into a supply violation, not a driving choice. 7. In the Second World War, public weather forecasting in Britain was restricted because wind, visibility, and timing could help military planning. Newspapers and radio broadcasts went vague where people used to get specifics. Broadcasters followed wartime controls even when listeners hated it. The forecast disappeared, and people went back to guessing from the window. Information can become a rationed resource too. 8. During the Second World War, new passenger cars essentially vanished for American civilians as factories shifted to wartime production. Showrooms emptied, and replacements stopped being a real option. Federal priorities redirected manufacturing, and the shortage forced repairs, reuse, and improvisation. Everyone learned to keep old engines alive longer than they should have. The engine coughed, and the answer was always, not available. 9. Wartime Britain restricted buying rounds of drinks in pubs to curb fast drinking and disorder. Pub owners and staff enforced it by refusing service, because violations could bring penalties to the business. A friendly, "this one's on me," suddenly became the wrong move. A round of drinks became a paperwork problem for the pub. 10. American wartime utility standards pushed clothing towards simpler, less wasteful designs, including limits affecting men's suits. Extra fabric, cuffs, and decorative features were treated as unnecessary consumption. Manufacturers followed the standards, and stores stocked what the rules allowed. The rack stopped selling style first and started selling compliance first. By this point, the rules stop feeling quirky and start feeling structural. 11. In wartime Britain, church bells were restricted so they would not ring as everyday background sound. Bells were effectively reserved for emergencies, not comfort, not routine, not celebration. Churches complied, and whole towns had to relearn what normal sounded like. An ordinary town sounded different, and everyone noticed. 12. Typewriters became harder to get during the Second World War because materials and factory capacity were redirected. Suppliers prioritized wartime needs, and small offices waited longer for replacements and parts. One broken machine could slow down everything behind it because one missing key could stall the whole office. 13. In Britain, precious metals were restricted, and utility wedding rings became common under wartime controls. Jewelers followed rules on materials and availability, and couples adapted whether they liked it or not. The ring didn't vanish, it just got simpler, because the supply chain had other priorities. The promise stayed, the metal got downgraded. 14. Dig for victory pushed home gardens hard in Britain because food supply mattered as much as morale. Campaigns and community pressure turned lawns and empty lots into soil, seed packets, and rows of vegetables. The enforcement was often social: posters, neighbors, and the quiet expectation that you'd contribute. Backyards turned into rows, and pride turned into produce. 15. During the Second World War, coastal cities dimmed and adjusted lighting because visibility mattered offshore. Civil defense guidance shaped what stayed lit, how it was shielded, and when it went dark. Skylines looked edited, not for style, but for defense. The same streets were still there, the night just looked censored. 16. Rationing in Britain reached weddings and celebrations in ways that changed what people could serve. Sugar and fats were limited, and the cake became a constraint problem, not a fantasy. Bakers operated under ration rules that narrowed options, and families made do. The guest list didn't shrink, the ingredients did. 17. During the Second World War, cameras drew suspicion around restricted areas and sensitive infrastructure. Police and military personnel questioned people and sometimes confiscated film when they believed rules were violated. A casual photo of a bridge could suddenly look like the wrong kind of interest. The camera went up, and the questions started. 18. In Britain, wartime conservation reached bathing, and guidance could get uncomfortably specific about hot water use. Fuel and heating were treated as resources first, comfort second. Local messaging pushed compliance, and shortages made the pressure real in daily routines. People did mental math beside a bathtub like it was a luxury purchase. Warmth didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling guaranteed. 19. Wartime Britain directed many women into war work based on age and national need. For some, the assignment was not a suggestion. It was a requirement backed by consequences for refusal. Government agencies administered the system, and families adjusted around it. One letter could reroute a life, and there wasn't a counter-argument. 20. British crosswords drew official attention at one point because certain words appeared that seemed linked to sensitive military terms, according to widely repeated accounts. Authorities investigated when it looked suspicious, even if coincidence explained it. A puzzle page became anxiety instead of entertainment. When a crossword page feels risky, the temperature is already too high. 21. Blackout rules turned holiday lights into a violation. A tiny string of bulbs in a window was still light leaking into the night, and that was the whole problem. Wardens patrolled neighborhoods and issued warnings and fines when they spotted visible glow during enforced blackout hours. Holiday lights didn't disappear, they just went underground. 22. The telephone system in wartime Britain got treated like essential infrastructure, not personal convenience. Operators were instructed to prioritize official or necessary traffic, and long-distance calling could be discouraged, delayed, or limited. Families got a dial tone, and the military got the line. Connection turned scheduled, not spontaneous. 23. Pigeon keeping in wartime Britain drew suspicion because birds can carry messages, and untracked communication made officials nervous. A rooftop loft stopped reading as quirky and started reading as a network. Authorities targeted unregistered or suspicious setups, and enforcement could include seizures and penalties in some cases. 24. Wartime programs sometimes pulled dogs into practical roles, depending on place and period, through organized service, messaging, or civil defense needs. Posters and local expectations framed participation as duty, which made saying no socially costly. Where organized, officials coordinated assignments and compliance. The dog stayed the same. The label on it changed. 25. When nylon and silk were redirected during the Second World War, stockings became scarce and improvisation became normal. Cosmetics and drawn seams stepped in to fake what stores could not sell. Supply followed wartime priorities, and the shortage lasted long enough to rewrite routines. The shortage showed up in the mirror every morning. 26. After Pearl Harbor, civilian air travel in the United States tightened as military and government needs took priority. Routes shifted, seats vanished, and schedules became less reliable for ordinary travelers. Airlines operated under wartime controls, and cancellations landed like a normal part of planning. A ticket didn't guarantee a seat anymore. 27. Wartime mail censorship meant letters were not always private and could be delayed, cut, or withheld. Censors processed mail under wartime authority, and people learned to write around what might raise flags. An envelope could arrive looking normal, then open into gaps and blunt edges. The sweetest sentences were often the ones missing. 28. In some wartime drives, hair was reportedly collected for specialized industrial uses tied to equipment needs. Barbershops and local collections treated clippings like material, not trash, and the patriotic pitch did the rest. A donation box could sit beside the chair like it belonged there. The government got the hair, and the barbershop got a collection box. 29. Nightlife in wartime often faced restrictions through curfews, licensing limits, and pressure to reduce gatherings. A normal night out shrank into a short window or vanished entirely. Local authorities enforced closing times that made fun look irresponsible. Bands packed up early, lights came on, and crowds got pushed toward the door. Relief ended when the clock said it ended. 30. Gasoline rationing in the United States made pleasure driving a real issue, not just a scolding. Ration books and coupons turned movement into paperwork, and enforcement sometimes made examples of drivers seen as wasting controlled fuel. A scenic route started looking like a moral failing. Freedom started requiring a coupon. 31. Rubber rationing made bicycle tires feel like a controlled resource instead of a cheap replacement. Inner tubes, patches, and careful riding suddenly mattered a lot more. Rationing rules limited access to materials, and shortages did the rest. Shops repaired what they could, and riders learned to baby every mile. A flat tire stopped being a nuisance and became a problem you couldn't replace. 32. Even mousetraps got dragged into wartime material controls because metal springs were not considered sacred. Manufacturers followed restrictions on non-essential metal use, and stores ended up with weaker substitutes in some cases. Meanwhile, the mice kept showing up on schedule. Local supply and enforcement pressures made make do the only plan. The government got the steel, the homeowners got the splinters, and the mice won. 33. During the First World War in the United States, anti-German sentiment helped drive laws in some states restricting the teaching of German. Classrooms changed overnight, and a language turned into a loyalty test. State and local authorities enforced the bans where they existed, and schools complied. Kids learned quickly which words made adults flinch. Grammar wasn't the lesson anymore. 34. Whipped cream was reportedly restricted in the United States for a period during the Second World War as part of dairy conservation and supply priorities. Restaurants and cellars followed controls and availability, and dessert showed up missing the extra. Staff had to say no with a straight face, even when customers complained. The missing topping was the policy: served cold. 35. Metal caskets were restricted in the United States during the Second World War because steel and copper were needed for production. Funeral homes and manufacturers complied with material limits, and families took what was available. The enforcement wasn't dramatic. It was logistical: what could be sold and what could be made. Even grief had to fit inside a materials list. 36. Paper rationing in wartime Britain made printing and packaging feel like luxuries. Shops wrapped purchases in plain brown paper, and newspapers got thinner. Printers and businesses worked under paper quotas, and inspectors could investigate waste or unauthorized printing. Menus shrank, boxes vanished, and even gift wrap started looking suspiciously extra. The gift stayed. The wrapping got demoted to brown paper. 37. Travel in wartime Britain could require permission or face heavy restrictions because movement was treated as risk, capacity, and resource use. Visiting family turned into forms, approvals, and denials. Officials decided what counted as essential travel, and that judgment carried real weight. Paperwork became a gate, not a formality. The stamp mattered more than the reason. 38. Careless talk costs lives was more than a slogan. It was a warning backed by real pressure. Posters told people not to share schedules, locations, or rumors that could help the enemy. Authorities investigated disclosures when they believed lines were crossed, and communities learned to self-police. Conversations got shorter, and silence got louder. The room got quieter, and nobody needed to be told why. 39. During the Blitz, British civil defense pushed households toward preparedness, including readiness to deal with incendiaries and fires. Ordinary homes were expected to act like part of the defense system. Local civil defense groups organized guidance and inspections where they existed, and people complied because the stakes were obvious. Buckets and sand didn't just become a kit, they became part of the furniture. 40. Wartime Britain restricted non-essential pottery and decorative goods to conserve fuel, clay, and factory capacity. Production priorities cut off many consumer items, and stores sold utility versions instead. Retailers followed what could be stocked, and shelves made the rules visible without a sign. The prettiest section in the shop became the emptiest. Austerity showed up as empty space you could see from the aisle. 41. Britain removed road signs in many areas to make navigation harder for an invader. Authorities carried out removals as a defense measure, and the side effect was immediate. Locals got lost on purpose. Police and wardens weren't handing out directions. The confusion was part of the plan. Drivers circled familiar crossroads arguing over turns. The confusion was part of the plan. The invaders would be confused, but the locals were absolutely lost. 42. Utility furniture in wartime Britain meant simple, approved designs that conserved materials and kept production focused. Factories and retailers complied with schemes that dictated what could be made and sold. A chair could arrive stamped with approval like it was a controlled substance. Homes still needed warmth, but the catalog offered function, not charm. The furniture was approved. The warmth was optional. 43. In 1943, pennies were made from steel because copper was needed for the war. The mint changed production under wartime material demands, and people adapted to coins that looked wrong and behaved differently. A handful of change could feel like it came from a different timeline. History clinked in your pocket in steel. 44. Hoarding rationed goods was treated as a real offense in many rationing systems because stockpiling threatened fairness and supply. Inspectors investigated violations, and penalties followed when cases were proven. Grocery aisles started feeling like places where everyone watched everyone. People learned to keep purchases modest, even when fear said buy more. Panic became prosecutable. 45. Wartime Britain restricted restaurants through rules that limited menus and courses, aiming to conserve rationed ingredients and reduce waste. Restaurant owners complied or risked penalties that could shut them down. Diners adjusted to fewer options and smaller expectations. Paying for a meal did not buy unlimited choice. Money still left your wallet. Choice did not increase. 46. In the United States during the First World War, anti-German sentiment drove renaming and stigma in many communities, sometimes through policy and pressure rather than one national statute. Words and foods got patriotic makeovers, and public life followed the trend. Schools and local leaders pushed the shift, and businesses changed signs to match the mood. A renamed label could redraw who counted as U.S. 47. In wartime America, getting new phone lines and equipment could become difficult because copper and infrastructure were prioritized for the war effort. Providers followed material constraints and priority rules that left civilians waiting. Moving could mean living without service longer than anyone expected. A silent phone on a kitchen wall became its own kind of stress. Living without luxuries is one thing. Losing basic connection hits differently. 48. In some wartime contexts, weather details like wind direction and visibility were treated as sensitive because they could help planning and targeting. Public information got limited, delayed, or softened under wartime controls. Weather talk became oddly cautious in certain settings. Even small talk tightened up when the sky started sounding like intelligence. Normal conversation narrowed, word by word. 49. Wartime restrictions hit musical instruments too, because brass and manufacturing capacity were needed elsewhere. Repair replaced replacement, and dents became permanent. Shops carried less, and families made do with what they already owned. School bands kept playing, but the sound got thinner and more patched together. The band kept playing, and the shortage played along with it. 50. In wartime Britain, civilians could be required to do fire watch duty during air raids, taking turns on rooftops watching for incendiaries. Local civil defense systems ran rosters and expected participation, and refusal could bring consequences. Buckets, sand, and watch shifts became part of the night. The roster on the wall drafted civilians into the night. That is the pattern. Ordinary life rewritten by emergency rules, sometimes for survival, sometimes for control, often both. Which one would have broken your patience first? And which one sounds weirdly familiar today? This video is for information and entertainment. It is not legal advice. Rules vary by city and state.